You're watching VinylicPumaGaming. There's a saying that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. While the Mede Dynasty's perverted version of the Septim Empire runs rampant with corruption and disregard for Tiber Septim, who actually formed the empire in the first place, they may ultimately prove to be Skyrim's best choice as a part of the Skyrim Civil War questline. On the one hand, the Imperial military doesn't really care about the nords and their customs, and they ultimately prosecute soldiers within their ranks that decide that they want to worship Talos. At the same time, the Empire does seem open to other races and is willing to let them worship who they want to worship. While the Thalmor have the Empire under the oppressive White Gold Concordat Treaty, many Imperial officials and high members within the government have no love for the Thalmor or Aldmeri Dominion. Before we get any further into this particular video, I'm going to let you guys know that I prefer the Stormcloaks if my bias isn't already apparent. Even still, I'm going to try and make a case as to why the Imperials may end up being the best option in the long run. Despite the Empire's major flaws, they do have some notable points when it comes to Ulfric Stormcloak and his Stormcloak Rebellion. So, without further ado, this is why Skyrim should remain unified with the Empire. The first major point of contention is Ulfric Stormcloak, along with his beliefs and motives as to why he is doing what he is doing. According to the Thalmor dossier on Ulfric Stormcloak, Ulfric appears to have once been a Thalmor asset or agent. This is evident from the following passages. After the war, contact was established and he has proven his worth as an asset. The so-called Markarth incident was particularly valuable from the point of view of our strategic goals in Skyrim, although it resulted in Ulfric becoming generally uncooperative to direct contact. Operational notes. Direct contact remains a possibility under extreme circumstances, but in general, the asset should be considered dormant. As long as the Civil War proceeds in its current indecisive fashion, we should remain hands-off. The incident at Helgen is an example where an exception had to be made. Obviously, Ulfric's death would have dramatically increased the chance of an Imperial victory, and thus harmed our overall position in Skyrim. A Stormcloak victory is also to be avoided, however, so even indirect aid to the Stormcloaks must be carefully managed. Okay, so these three passages indicate a number of things. Before the Markarth incident, Ulfric Stormcloak was a cooperative asset for the Thalmor, feasibly working against the Empire and its interests. It's fair to infer that the Thalmor benefited from the Markarth incident's outcome, as it further destabilized the Empire's hold of Skyrim and resulted in the imprisonment of Ulfric Stormcloak. While Ulfric's imprisonment made him quote-unquote uncooperative, it would sow the seeds for the Stormcloak Rebellion. Despite the imprisonment, the Thalmor consider him to be a dormant operative, and we also know that the Thalmor do indirectly aid the Stormcloak Rebellion. While the Aldmeri Dominion don't want either side to win outright, you do have to wonder about Ulfric Stormcloak's motives and beliefs. Is he really trying to liberate the people of Skyrim from a corrupt and weak empire? Is Ulfric just doing this for his own selfish reasons, or has he been a Dominion operative all along, seeking to destabilize the region? If it's the latter two of the three, then Ulfric would be bad for Skyrim and would make a terrible High King. He's already murdered one High King, who's to say he wouldn't bring harm to those that don't fall in line? While you could say the Stormcloak Rebellion was born or conceptualized after the Markarth incident, the actual Civil War was started when Ulfric Stormcloak challenged High King Torygg to a duel and killed him. While the Stormcloaks believe that Torygg was a puppet of the Empire, if you talk to members of Torygg's court, you will discover that Torygg greatly respected Ulfric Stormcloak. A reasonable theory is that Ulfric killed High King Torygg to rally his base and start a war with the Empire. This seems to become evident when you ask Sybil Stentor about High King Torygg's death. When asked, quote-unquote, why was Torygg killed, she says the following.
Because Ulfric needed a symbol. Someone he could defeat that represented the Empire. The White Gold Concordat, the banning of Talos worship. Torygg's father Islot had held Skyrim together for nearly 25 years. When he died, Torygg became that symbol.
When Sybil is asked, quote-unquote, so the war started when Islot died, she says,
No, Even after Isla died, the Moot voted to make Torygg High King of Skyrim. But Ulfric was at that Moot, continually talking about Skyrim's independence in terms just shy of treason. I don't think Ulfric knew how much Torygg respected him for that. If Ulfric had asked Torygg directly to stand up, to declare independence, Torygg might have done it.
Finally, when asked why Torygg didn't ever declare independence, Sybil Stentor says,
"Because the Dominion is a sleeping beast that Skyrim cannot slay alone. Because many Nords are part of the Imperial army even now. Because the food and resources we get from the Empire are important to our people. Because even if we can't openly worship him, Talos the god was once Tiber Septim the man, and this is his empire. And Torygg wasn't ready to let it fall apart."
So Sybil Stentor indicates that Ulfric needed a scapegoat who represented all of the bad things that were happening to Skyrim's people. As we often see in our own history, he needed an excuse to go to war. This ultimately took the form of High King Torygg, despite the fact that Torygg was legitimately elected to be Skyrim's High King and greatly respected Ulfric Stormcloak. That said, while Sybil indicates High King Torygg may have declared Skyrim's independence if Ulfric merely asked, I'm not so sure. That's because she says Skyrim wouldn't be able to win the fight against the Dominion alone. She also specifically says, quote, because even if we can't openly worship him, Talos the god was once Tiber Septim the man, and this is his empire, and Torygg wasn't ready to let it fall apart. Ultimately, Torygg's allegiance was to the Empire, even if he understood and may have agreed and respected some of what Ulfric had to say. This may have been why Ulfric murdered him. Based on what we've just heard from Sybil Stentor, if the Empire were to lose Skyrim, this would have a number of dire consequences. As Sybil mentioned, much of the Imperial army is occupied by Nords. What becomes of these soldiers if the Stormcloaks are victorious? Do they desert the Legion? Does the Legion round them up and imprison or execute them? Now, on the one hand, the Legion can't lose their Nordic forces, and they should punish them if they decide to desert or mutiny against command. However, the Legion can't punish them either, because if they do, it will vindicate the Stormcloak Rebellion and the need for Skyrim's independence. If Tullius is defeated in Skyrim, it will end up unraveling the Empire. This is because Cyrodiil doesn't share a border with High Rock, so if Skyrim did become independent, this would make it difficult for Imperial forces to protect High Rock. Perhaps High Rock would also eventually desire independence from the Empire at that point. After all, their closest options for trade are going to be Hammerfell and Skyrim. I also suspect that the Imperial Legion will try to invade Skyrim again and retake it from the Stormcloaks. If this happens, the Aldmeri Dominion gets the prolonged civil war they want, while they also weaken both Skyrim's independent army as well as the Imperial Legion. Given that the Empire is under some Thalmor influence, an Imperial invasion of Skyrim is likely. Sybil Stentor, along with some of the other NPCs in Skyrim, mention that despite Skyrim's vast iron deposits and resources, they greatly benefit from trade with the Empire. If Skyrim leaves, it's fair to say they will lose out on having the Empire as a major trading partner. The only places Skyrim could trade with are Hammerfell and Blackmarsh. However, keep in mind that the Nords seem to hate the Argonians who occupy Blackmarsh. Otherwise, most of the countries or provinces of Tamriel are under either Imperial or Dominion control. Even if Skyrim could trade with the Imperial provinces, Imperial taxes and sanctions would disadvantage Skyrim. The Dominion would most likely also make it difficult for Skyrim to trade with Dominion provinces. If Skyrim can't find a suitable trading partner, it may prove more difficult to remain independent. At the same time, they are bordered with Hammerfell, so they could always trade with them, though Hammerfell may not have everything that Skyrim needs. If the Stormcloaks win, they're going to have a tough fight with the Aldmeri Dominion. The Dominion almost wiped out the Empire 30 years prior, and that was when both Hammerfell and Skyrim were undisputed provinces of the Empire. While Hammerfell could join with Skyrim in their fight against the Dominion, this isn't guaranteed to happen. While I personally think it will happen, the Redguards and Nords may find each other incompatible. If the Empire retains control of Skyrim, the Empire would be able to draw forces from not only Skyrim, but also High Rock and Cyrodiil. Depending on how much Hammerfell hates the Dominion, perhaps they could forgive the Empire for the White Gold Concordat and join them to fight with the Dominion. Logistically speaking, it will be an easier war to win with the 3 Imperial provinces and parts of Morrowind, as opposed to just the 2 independent provinces of Hammerfell and Skyrim on their own. You also have to consider that if the Stormcloaks win, they will receive no aid from the Empire if the Aldmeri Dominion decide to invade Skyrim. And again, while Hammerfell might help, this isn't a guarantee as they aren't obligated to do so. Racism also plays a big part in Skyrim. You have the Aldmeri Dominion, who view the various races of men as inferior. You have Faendal from Riverwood, who thinks that Nords in general are kinda dumb. Orcs in Skyrim are forced to live in remote communities throughout the area, and as for the Stormcloaks, they do appear to have some prejudice towards both the Dark Elves and Argonians. The Dark Elves in particular live in a part of Windhelm known as the Grey Quarter. Ulfric ultimately seems like he wants to keep them there, separate from the rest of the population. Ulfric's opinions on Dark Elves are made clear by Brunwulf Freewinter. When asked, why help the Dark Elves, Brunwulf has this to say.
Help the Dark Elves? Oh, you must have heard me talking to Malfir. The Dark Elves live in a run-down slum called the Grey Quarter. Ulfric's content to keep it that way. I guess they think I can open Ulfric's eyes to their plight and get him to lift a finger on their behalf. I'm trying, but Ulfric is set in his ways. For him, there's 2 kinds of people in this world. Nords and the folk beneath them.
We also have to consider the Nords' treatment of the Argonians in Windhelm. While the Dark Elves get to live in the rundown Grey Quarter, Argonians live in the Argonian Assemblage. The Assemblage is a very small dwelling home to Windhelm's Argonian population. When you speak to Scout's Manymarshes and ask him if he's having trouble, it's revealed that Torbjorn Shattershield pays Argonians a fraction of what he would pay a Nord. Here is what Scout's Manymarshes has to say about that.
Torbjorn Shattershield. I wish someone would beat the coin out of his fat fists. He clings to every septum. He says an Argonian's labor is only worth 1/10 of a proper Nord worker. My people are not slaves.
Now, to be fair, Naranya, a High Elf merchant in western Windhelm, does appear to be treated fairly well. You would think that based on the treatment of both the Dark Elves and Argonians, that she would suffer similar treatment, especially since High Elves are associated with the Dominion. If you ask me, Nords do appear to care only about other Nords, often at the expense of the other races in Skyrim. In some cases, I would say this is indeed racism. However, in other cases, maybe the Nords are too self-absorbed to care about others. It does ultimately beg this question, though. If the Stormcloaks win, how are they going to treat the other Argonians, Dark Elves, and Khajiit that work throughout Skyrim? If Windhelm is any indication, it may not be entirely ideal. The Empire, on the other hand, doesn't really seem to express any racist sentiments. Sure, they probably don't like the High Elves or Thalmor, but ultimately everyone seems to be accepted. The only people that aren't accepted are Talos worshippers. And it is understandable why Nords are very upset with the outlaw of Talos worship. I guess the big question is, if the Imperials win the Civil War in Skyrim, what happens? Well, Skyrim will simply be reunited under Imperial rule as a part of the Empire. For the most part, I don't really expect a whole lot to change, other than the end of the Stormcloaks and their rebellion. Conditions for the minorities in Windhelm would possibly improve, especially since Brunwulf Freewinter would be installed as Windhelm's Jarl. On the flip side, all Talos worship would be banned throughout Skyrim once again. This would obviously continue to piss off the local Nords and may end up making for future rebellions that the Empire will have to quell again and again. Perhaps these rebellions would be most likely instigated and indirectly backed by the Thalmor and Aldmeri Dominion. While the Empire did almost lose to the Aldmeri Dominion before, they may have some capacity to fight them more effectively now. It's been about 30 years or so since the Great War, and in another 10 years, much of the Imperial Legion will have recovered. You will also have a more diverse fighting force if you're drawing from several different provinces of Tamriel, rather than just one or two independent provinces. At the same time, the Dominion has also had 30 years to recover and rebuild their armies. Both sides know that when they go to war, there will be massive amounts of casualties on both sides. Regardless of who wins the Skyrim Civil War, they are going to be fighting a resupplied Aldmeri Dominion, both with impressive military might and stratagem. At the end of the day, while I don't particularly like the Imperials, I think I understand where they're coming from when it comes to their opinions on Ulfric's Stormcloak. Even as somebody that likes the Stormcloaks, you've got to wonder what his independent Skyrim is going to look like. Is it going to be a united Skyrim where the Nordic and Dunmer populations get along and prosper, or is Skyrim going to be a home for Nords and Nords only? Furthermore, what happens to the Nords in the Imperial Legion after a Stormcloak victory? Do those guys abandon their post and suffer punishment, or do they continue to serve against their own people? Maybe either way, Skyrim is just screwed. I'd be curious to see what the canon outcome is for the next Elder Scrolls game. Alright guys, that's going to pretty much wrap up this particular video. If you like this video, please be sure to leave a like, and as always, take care, and I'll see y'all next time.